Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January meeting of the Law Enforcement Policy Task Force. I guess I should also say Happy New Year to everyone since we're in 2021 now. It's good to see all of you here. Some preliminary information. First of all, I ask that all participants stay muted until they are recognized to speak, and task force members will be allowed to ask questions or comments at any time during the meeting. Please use the Zoom hand raise feature to speak. This system automatically cues speakers in the order that the hands were raised. And keep in mind, with such a large number of people as we have on the call, we cannot always see you on screen if you're just physically raising your hand. So you should have the hand raise feature at the bottom of your screen, and just click on that, and that way it will cue you in. If the video conference is disconnected at any time during the meeting shall be stopped and reconvened once the audio and video connection is restored. If communications are unable to be restored within 15 minutes, items remaining to be heard will be placed on the next scheduled meeting agenda. Okay. Our first item on the agenda, or actually the second item on the agenda, is we have representatives with us today from our consultant company, 21CP Solutions, and they are going to present and tell you a little bit about them. And 21CP, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, sir. As some of you who heard on the very beginning, my name is Roberto Villasenor, but everyone calls me Taz, and so please feel free to do that. I just want to thank you for allowing us to participate, and we are very excited to be part of this project. We're not going to take up much time today because we feel it's vitally important for us to listen more than to talk at this point. You've got all our bios, you've got information about us. You can peruse that later. So we'll give very short intros of ourselves. We have almost all of our project members here. There's a couple that are missing just because of previous obligations. It's Commissioner Chuck Ramsey, and I believe Chief Kathleen O'Toole will be joining if she hasn't already. I can't see both screens. Just a quick background, 21CP was formed at the end of 2015, and it came about as a result of several of us being selected and participating in President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. That was a very landmark occasion that came about after events in Ferguson, New York, and elsewhere in the country that started dealing with the issue of police reform and healing the broken bridges between communities and their police departments. At the end of 2015, both Commissioner Ramsey and myself retired, and along with Sean Smoot, the three of us formed 21CP Solutions, continuing the work that we started on the task force. We've since grown to 7 partners total with a number of senior associates. You'll see a variety of us on this program. So again, my background, I come from a police background. I'm 35 years at Tucson Police Department, involved with issues in border, immigration, and that's what started me on my path of police reform. So I'm going to go down the line of our project members here real quickly so that we can just get everyone to say hi, and then we can turn the meeting over to the business at hand. I'll go in the order that I have it on my screen here. And first, I think Kathy, we're going to wait on her. Or is Kathy on? Apparently not. So from there, I'll turn it over to Hassan, then Ray, Jessica, Ganesha, and Brian.
Afternoon, everyone. I'll be brief. I've got a police background, 3 decades, served in 2 departments, retired as chief of police. My reform work focuses on consent decrees. I've worked in Seattle, currently work in Baltimore, and I'm the federally appointed monitor overseeing the Cleveland consent decree. Thanks.
Ray, could you go next, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ray Kelly. I'm a longtime community organizer, advocate, and activist from Baltimore City, and I'm the director of an organization called the Citizens Policing Project.
Thank you. Jessica?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Drake. I'm the community engagement and community policing expert for 21CP Solutions, and happy to be here with you. I'm experiencing bandwidth, so I'm sorry I'll be going off camera but I would like to hear you, and I've decided that's more important than you seeing me. So thank you for your patience.
Ganesha?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ganesha Martin. I'm an attorney by education and training. I spent the last decade working in violence reduction and police reform in the city of Baltimore, both at the mayor's office and the police department. And since I left, I've been doing consulting around the country around police reform, working with police departments and community groups, focusing the voices that these policies and procedures affect directly, which are the community and the police that are sworn to protect and to serve the community. I'm very honored to be here with you all today and look forward to the conversation we're going to have.
And Brian, we'll end up with you and then allow you to phase right into the project timeline and phases.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Brian Maxey. Most recently, I was the Chief Operating Officer of the Seattle Police Department, where I focused on driving the department into compliance with the consent decree with the Department of Justice there, focusing on policies, systems, community engagement, training, a whole host of issues. More recently, I've been involved in consent decree work in Baltimore and Cleveland, and working with a variety of other departments to bring them into 21st century policing objectives. Take just a couple quick moments just to outline the project. My role in this is really to keep the trains running and keep the project focused. Right now we are in the phase 1, which is the launch of the project. This is really where we get up to speed. We read the policies, we look at all of the history of the work that's been done in Oklahoma City to date. We try to digest all this, see what the lay of the land is. Our conversations with this group and other community members are going to be key to informing our approach to this overall project. We certainly understand policing. We've worked with a lot of departments, but we are new to your community and to your department, and we need to ferret out the specifics. One of the hallmarks of our approach to these projects is recognizing that there is often a wide divide between what policy says, what the department says it does, and then what actually happens on the ground. And what we try to do is find where the gaps are between those areas. So during this launch phase, we're going to be doing a host of initial meetings with a variety of stakeholders, and we're going to be doing a comprehensive request to the department for information, for training, for protocols, policies, etc., and digesting those. Phase 2 is really digging deeper into community engagement. As part of our contract, we are to do a community survey. As we set forth in our response to the RFP, it's our preference to partner with a local entity to do this, probably an educational entity, so that whatever work is done in engaging and teasing out the interests and perspectives of the community can be redone over time, even after we're there. If it's local, it's got a local focus, it can be carried on in time. Once we digest all the information, we talk to the community, we figure out what the priorities are, we figure out what the recommendations are. We're then tasked with kind of a sanity check on all of that. What can be done? What should be done first? How much is it going to cost? And what's the best path to actually get there? What we don't like doing is simply giving recommendations. We like to give a path forward that actually helps a city, a department, and a community succeed in implementing the reforms. And then phase 4 of the project really is coming back around, figuring out whether we got it right, and getting final approval to move forward with it. That's just in a nutshell what our approach is. We're happy to answer any questions about that along the way. But again, we don't want to take too much of your time up on this. You should have materials related to this approach that were sent to you. And again, happy to answer any questions. At this point, I think I turn it back over to Ganesha to move forward with the next section.
Good afternoon. Were there any questions before we move on to the next item on the agenda for anything that Brian mentioned? Yeah, Sarah, I see your hand.
Sorry, I couldn't find my raise hand option. I was looking for it all over my screen. I'm sure I'll find it as soon as I'm done here. Thank you. I wanted to ask about phase 2 and your engagement with the community. I see that there is a survey, but I was wondering, are there going to be any community engagements with the community, more like face-to-face? And I mean that like via Zoom or virtual, so that some of our communities don't really engage with surveys and have barriers with technology or Wi-Fi or internet. And so just wanted to see if they were how that engagement would be done.
So I'll take that one. Absolutely, Sarah. You know, if we weren't in COVID times, we'd already be on the ground and be having this conversation in person. And so there's two ways that we're looking at this, and I'm going to bring this up specifically in the agenda a little bit later. But first of all, because of, you know, everything that's been going on in Oklahoma, there's already a list of several people that we're going to be reaching out to and talking to, and we're going to start that immediately. And some of those will be large groups, small groups, one-on-one, all of those things. The other thing that we're going to look for this group to do is to tell us, you need to talk to such and such. You know, they work 2 jobs. You're going to have to talk to them at 10 o'clock at night. You're going to have to talk to them at 8, whatever it is, however it is. We will also rely on this gathering of folks to instruct us on some of the engagement that needs to happen, because I 100% agree with you. Surveys, even in regular times, leave out critical voices in our community for distrust and a whole host of other reasons. So we will be engaging in a multitude of ways, primarily through the Zoom platform.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
I think, did Josh have his hand raised?
Yes, I did. So my question actually concerns phase 1. Down there at the bottom where it says a review of national and global best practices concerning each of the topics listed above. I'm wondering, what is the source of those best practices, whether it be nationally or globally? Like, what does that actually mean? I know that there's a lot of reading various things, actually, including the 21CP, the task force report in 2017, as I think when it was published. Reading through that and a few books and other things, it seems like there's actually a lack of best practices as far as standardized best practices within policing generally. So I'm wondering, what does that actually refer to?
Go ahead and try and take a crack at that. Being part of the task force and developing that task force report, I agree with some of your statements, and what we came out with recommendations that we felt communities and departments should implement. A lot of our work since 2015, when this company was formed, was going out and helping communities develop and implement those practices. So we will come across and give suggestions on some of the things that we have been part of or that we have seen or discovered in different communities we worked. You've heard at the beginning that several of us have worked or are working in communities that are under consent decree or just completed consent decree, such as Baltimore, Cleveland, Seattle, New Orleans. So we have helped in the development of best practices along with DOJ and community groups that have been involved in those best practice developments, so that we finally can get a voice of the community involved into how their policing occurs. And we would like to give some of those ideas to this task force and to see if that fits into Oklahoma City. One of the things that we said in that task force report, though, is each community is different, and each community needs to look at what works for them and what their needs and desires are. So your voice is vitally important in the development of what you consider best practices for Oklahoma City. But we'll be looking across the country for areas that we've worked in or areas that we're aware of, giving ideas, and then working with you as to what you feel is important and works in Oklahoma City.
I think that was really well said, and just to follow up very briefly, I mean, this is part of what 21CP as an organization does. We have many associates in different areas. Our partners are plugged in at the national scene. We're working with a host different departments and public safety entities and universities across mostly in the United States at this point, although there is broad-based international experience as well. And when Chief O'Toole joins, she can certainly talk to her work in the peace process in Ireland and working across the pond in some of those systems. But to Taz's point and to Josh's point, these best practices are in flux right now. People's perceptions of what it means to engage in public safety, where they want the focus to be, what the impacts on communities are, it's ever changing. And part of what we do as an organization is try to keep our finger on the pulse of new ideas and new innovations, do a sanity check on what works and what does not work, and then work with the departments and communities to figure out what's best for them, as Taz said.
Just as a quick follow-up, or I guess my understanding of the term best practices involves something that's quantifiable. Are there, of the communities that you've worked with in establishing best practices, is there data? Are there data points that you try to hit on that like sort of establish or help inform those best practices?
So in many jurisdictions, Seattle and New Orleans come to mind immediately. There are quantifiable changes based on training and policy development, reduction in use of force overall, a focus on reducing force related to persons in crisis, and deeper analysis into racial disparities in policing and some of the things that might help change departmental priorities that can help alleviate those. So some of this is quantifiable. Some of it is a little more amorphous. For example, when you talk about racial disparities in policing engagements, there can be a lot of time spent trying to determine, is there or is there not a bias behind whatever disparity is found in data. And communities and departments and cities can chase after the so-called truth as to whether these biases exist. Perhaps a more productive methodology to approaching that is, instead of trying to parse the data and figure that out, assume that it could be a problem and figure out how to change deployments, change strategies, change trainings to increase awareness, and do your best to inoculate against it. You can always test for it and you can see changes, but again, trying to debate its existence is often an exercise in futility. Just an example about how the data is there, but interpreting it and getting at the truth can be sometimes elusive.
The last thing that I'll say on that, and I hope that this is something we address, is that, there's kind of a triad, if you will, about this work. It's the policies, it's the training, and then it's the accountability. And so you can have the policies and training all day, but if you don't have the accountability mechanisms in place to hold folks, accountable to what's been trained and what's been agreed upon by the community, particularly in this this space, then it's for naught. And so, Josh, one of the things that I would definitely say needs to be part of your thinking is once we determine as a group what our best practices for Oklahoma, then what are going to be the accountability mechanisms and metrics to make sure that people are actually holding up those community expectations. So I think that'll be critical. Are there any other questions before I move on to the next piece? Okay, so, and I know that you guys would agree with this, but this work is quite, for lack of a better term, sacred to me. I don't come into it lighthearted. While we're here as consultants, we have people who have lost lives. We have people who have lost freedoms. We have a lot of hurt and angst and anguish and all sorts of things. And so I feel like these spaces, when we're invited in, it's actually, a sacred kind of space, because the decisions that we're going to be talking about and making are going to hopefully, affect people for the better. And so I know that you guys have been meeting for a while already, and that you are 100% ready to really stop all the talking from the talking heads standing in front of the room and get to the point of where you are talking about your experiences and what you need to see happen for your community. So I understand that feeling. What I want to propose to you is that because we're new here, we want to establish a baseline and an understanding and hear from you. I know that there's things that we need to talk about, how these meetings are run. And I want to get to that a little bit later in the agenda. But what I want to put before you right now is an idea for us to have introductions of each one of you. And in so doing, you state your name and any entity that you might represent, but then also tell us what you want to get out of and what you expect of this task force and what you need and expect of us. And if there's no strong objections to that, I'd like to do that as a way of introducing you all, but then also to hear from you and about those two items. And then we'll delve in a little bit more with the time that we have on your expectations for future meetings and other things that you want to address in our very next meeting. But if there's no objections, then I'd like to do that with the task force members, not anybody that represents the city, but just the task force members. Any strong objections to us doing that? Okay, perfect. I'm going from frame to frame, so feel free to ring out if somebody sees somebody raise their hand and I don't see it.
Venetia,
Oh, go ahead.
Venetia, this is MT. Can I interrupt you just a minute? George Young has his hand raised.
Yes, listen, I appreciate that, but all of us know each other, and that's going to take a whole lot of time. And I do have an objection to that. It's just, to me, it's a waste of time. We already know each other. You can read the list of who's on the committee and see who they represent, which would save us a lot of time. We're trying to get to know you. We know each other, and then you can get to know us by reading, if that's all you're going to get, because you don't want us to say more than my name and whoever I'm representing or whatever I'm representing. So I would add, I don't know about everybody else. If they want to listen to that, that's fine. I think that's a waste of time for all of us to introduce ourselves to the committee. So that's my input.
Thank you, Mr. Young. And so what I might not have been clear about was I was hoping that your name would take all of 15 seconds and then you would answer the question and I'll read it. Maybe I should have gone better by my notes.
No. Let me stop you. No, that's not, I heard all of that. Okay. I'm still standing in the same place. Everybody else want to do that. That's fine. And they can do that. But I'm just saying that seems to me that's a waste of time to, at this point, because I want to listen to what you guys are presenting to us. And there may be people like myself who may have questions concerning that. So I could be the only person who feels that way. If I am, go have at it.
Okay, I appreciate that. I will say that what we had heard is that you were tired of people talking at you and that you wanted to start conveying to us the issues that you have and what you want to have done through this forum. So I'll leave it open.
That's great. That's great. Let us do that then. But we can tell you our names then as we raise issues. I may be the only person who feel that way, so please don't. You need to take a poll. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I do have another hand raised. Yes. Sarah Adams Cornell.
Thank you. I think it's very worthwhile for us to go through and do that because honestly, until this point, we've never been asked, what do we want to see out of this? So I think this is an important thing to go around and do. And I'm assuming that this is like part of your phase 1 launch is to find out who we are, what we're doing, and what we want to see happen so that you can, start your immediate work. So I'd be for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. We consider you guys the community. And so you're sitting here as representatives of yourself and perhaps even other members of the community. So absolutely, Sarah, that was part of the thinking. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
If you use the participants list, it might be easier for you to go through the names as opposed to wiping through slides.
Somebody just read my mind because I was like, how am I going to do that? Okay.
Denisha, would you like for me to make you a co-host so you can see the list? That's
Oh,
what
I think I can
you
see
see
it.
it all? Okay.
I think I can see it. Okay, so we're officially at a tie. 1 for and 1 against. Is there anybody else that wants to speak up about how they would like to proceed?
Like to just proceed. Let's get started.
All right, thank you. So first, and if you're part of the city, and because I apologize, I haven't memorized everybody, then just let me know. So the first person I have, and I already, forgive me for saying anybody's name wrong. Ganesha gets mispronounced all the time. It gets changed to Denise. So I apologize at the outset. So I have first Ajay Pittman.
Hello, everyone. I am Representative Ajay Pittman. I represent House District 99, which is central Oklahoma City. So that's downtown Oklahoma City, northeast Oklahoma City, and parts of northwest Oklahoma City. And as you learn our lay of the land, you'll get to know what that area is. I have hearts of the community as well as the state capitol and a lot of downtown Oklahoma City in my district. I would like to get out of this that we have education and understanding, and we learn best practices so that we can take them on into the next generation of leaders. We are in this moment for a pivotal role so that we can gain understanding and change something that has plagued our community for years. And as a millennial elected official, I want everyone who leads after us to see the example that we set for them.
Thank you for that. Next, I have up Amanda Carpenter.
I'm with the city.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I have Darla Cheek.
Hi, I'm Darla Cheek. I'm an executive director of a nonprofit and just honored to be a part of this task force. As far as what I would like to see come out of this is just a solid review of what we are doing and what can be done better and how to partner better together.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just gonna reiterate not only what you want to see come out of this, but also our role. And I'm gonna take for the last two people that spoke that part of the role that you want us to play is the education, the awareness, and bringing forward the best practices. Perfect, okay. Next, I'm gonna go to Debbie Martin, which is my aunt's name. I didn't know she was in Oklahoma. Debbie, are you with us?
She's part of the city.
Oh, okay. All right, then Dexter Nelson.
Yes, hello. First of all, I'm formerly with the city. I left the city with 32.5 years. I'm currently with Oklahoma City University as the chief of police there. What I'd like to see out of this is a sense of fairness. I think we need to get back to that Oklahoma standard that we're known for. I'm curious in hearing from you all an honest, open look at the police department to see what they could do better compared to other departments around the country and what we can do better to work with the community.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna, Ed K. I'm not even gonna try that. Mr. Ed K. Oh, there you go. How do you say your last name, sir?
Inyection. Don't look at it. Just use the word Ed. It works best.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
I'm the recently retired Episcopal Bishop of Oklahoma and a 20-year veteran of law enforcement prior to that. My hopes are improved police community relationships and greater transparency and trust between our community and our police officers.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Next, I have Gary Woods. Anybody see Mr. Woods on here?
Resort, unbelievable. They are doing it right out here. They're playing it safe. Come out, you win a lot of money.
I think that's
What's
somebody
going
else.
on? Great. Going to earn 10 points to receive $5 in slot day.
I know he was here, Ganesha, but I don't see him now.
Okay, and there's somebody that's unmuted. I think maybe is talking, maybe a TV or something. Okay, I think it's gone now. All right, so Mr. George Young, would you like to tell us what you think?
George Young, State Senator.
Thank you, sir. Gloria Torres.
Good afternoon. My name is Gloria Torres. I operate a nonprofit, and I'm also elected to the Oklahoma City Public Schools Board of Education. We are the largest school district in the state. I think what I would like to see out of this project as a whole is an identification of best practices, an introduction of best practices, and an overview of, as a police department, what are we doing? What are we not doing, and what can we do? And within that process, to identify processes of increased transparency, and maybe end up with a model community policing model that we can look at. This is how we do things right. We have a very engaged community here. We have very strong and vocal stakeholders here at the table, and to have the opportunity to have those stakeholder voices heard, not just heard, respected, and acted upon, is going to be extremely valuable as we continue to create and grow our relationship with our Oklahoma City Police Department. I think from you as an organization, what I'd like to see is actual steps taken and documented with realistic outcomes. To give me a recommendation of, if you do this, this would be, this is going to give you positive outcomes. But if this isn't a realistic strategy for our city, then I don't feel like you've done your job. Your job has to be to provide us with realistic, implementable strategies for our city.
Perfect. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. That can continue to guide our interaction, because we'll definitely need your input on what can actually happen in Oklahoma. I think I have Grace Franklin next.
Hi, I'm Grace Franklin. I am an executive director of a nonprofit that advocates for Black women and women of color. My expectation on the task force is that I'm hoping that we can come up with some policy changes that can be implemented in the near future for our Citizens Review Board, and also with the police department in some procedures, and also some training in cultural bias and mental health. And for the consulting firm, my expectation is for you all to bring us information, to gather and bring information about best practices in similar city sizes, to see if those can be implemented here. And also a pretty transparent review of our procedures and policies now with the Oklahoma City Police Department, to see what can be changed, what needs to be changed, and like a third eye perspective, someone coming in a little in a third party capacity to do that. So that's my expectation of the consulting firm and the hope for the task force.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anisha?
Yes, sir.
This is MT. I noticed that Gary Woods is back. If he can get unmuted, you might want to give him a chance.
Yeah, sorry about that. I actually had another situation that I was dealing with. So my name is Gary Woods, and I wear a bunch of different hats and do a bunch of different things, but I appreciate being a part of this task force. In terms of what I hope to, and this might sound really, really simple, but it's just the truth, and it don't take a whole lot of words to tell the truth. At the end of the day, I hope that the consulting firm, that as a consulting firm, that you all are able to, within the limitations and understanding the limitations and boundaries that exist as it relates to working with our police department, come up with and doing anything possible to reduce the incidents that have been occurring between police and our citizens within our community in particular. And because, like I said, I don't want to take anybody else's thunder or whatever, but it's, to me, we are an outlier, and we got to fix it. And I don't know what the solution is, but it just seems like, as much as we discuss it, no progress is being made. So I am looking forward to looking at, understanding the limitations, and hoping that, instead of saying no, we can say, instead of saying no, but we can say yes, and this is how, as it relates to bringing resolutions and improvements to the problem. And so that's pretty much all I have to say.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Mr. Cooper, James Cooper.
Hi there. Would you like for me to wait? I am a city council person.
No, we've had some other folks speak, so if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I was listening to folk and taking notes. So I have some numbers here. So number one, and I just think this is foundational. We, as law enforcement, as a city council, as city leadership, we need an honest understanding of the history of law enforcement's interactions with at-risk communities. For example, when I spoke last summer during our budget hearings around police, so many people came to me afterwards as I was citing, just the history of the Klan marching downtown and the state newspaper putting that on the front page and glorifying it. So many people were like, we did what? So much of our histories, our communities' histories don't even exist in our K through 12 education here, whether it's private or public school. You'll find out, as you all keep digging into our state's history, that until maybe 10 years ago, this state could barely bring itself to say the words Tulsa Race Massacre. And this is the 100-year anniversary this year. So I believe strongly that we can move forward in a productive, restorative, and healing manner. And it is only possible with this honest understanding. Another example I would use, the LGBT community. The only way we know the history of this city's LGBT community, the only way that we know for a fact, other than just common sense, that LGBTQ folk existed in Oklahoma City as far back as the city's founding, are arrest records. Arrest records. That's how we know. We know that 10 years in prison was the punishment for someone acting on same-sex attractions, for dressing on our then streetcar that we used to have downtown in the opposite sex's clothes. So a dissertation that exists on LGBTQ history in this city, the only way they could really document the teens, the 20s, the late 1890s, the 30s was because of laws that criminalized those attractions and empowered law enforcement to arrest folk, put them in jail, harass folk, and empowered district attorneys back in the day to, during elections, go out and arrest queer folk. So that's true. None of that is made up. None of that is in our K through 12 books. None of it, just not there. not there. So I think that that honest reckoning has to exist. It has to exist. And
May I ask you a clarifying question? Do you mean for that to happen in this forum first, with the task force members, or as a result? Okay.
Thank you, Ganesha, for that clarifying question. Yes, my expectation is that within this group, I think that is something that needs to take place because we are the community leaders, everyone in this this task force and the working group. And then my expectation from the work is that when this is all said and done, and I know it's a heavy lift, but there has to be a movement where we are talking about these histories, like that we are contextualizing this work within that re-examination of our histories. They keep throwing around this word Renaissance. OKC's having a renaissance in the last 25 years. Well, we all know a true renaissance means that we are reborn from something. But what we have never done a good job in this city and in this state is talking about the horrors before the Renaissance. It's almost like we're ashamed. And there should be shame, but there must be growth from it, and we don't do it. And I hate it. I hate that I have to be the one to say this, but I'm saying it because I believe that we can move forward in those restorative, healing, and productive ways. So that both within this group and as we leave, contextualizing this work for our people, because that's how I think our communities will buy in, is when we actually feel heard. My second ask are best practices as it relates to use of force and non-lethal force. I really am interested, for instance, not just within our own country, but how did it come to be that one of the world's great colonizers, Britain, does not have guns for their police officers? I don't know that history. I'm going to be digging into it, but I would love for both this task force to know more about that. And then ultimately for us to be honest with our residents about why we are taking the approaches that we have been taking historically and what we could be doing going forward. So that's my ask there. 3, I would really, yeah, I have a list. So thank you. 3 is, it's not necessarily spelled out in the task force focus when it comes to de-escalation and or the Citizens Advisory Board or the Community Policing Working Group, but I would like to learn more about cities around this country and this globe where they have implemented the sort of community policing that one of our own retired officers, current social worker, who's a part of the working group for that resolution. She did work here, and I saw a documentary about Newark, New Jersey that PBS did, and they talked about show some of that community policing work. I'd like to see that, and I would like to learn how we can implement that at the very least within the urban core, if not the entire city. And moreover, I'd like to know what the consequences have been from some of that were negative so that we can address those.
May I ask the name of the officer that was local?
Yes, thank you for that. Their name is Paula Sophia, and like Grace Franklin, Paula serves on our resolutions working group.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you. My next ask is, again, it's part of our scope of work, but I'd like to see what those best practices are as they relate to Citizens Advisory Board. Again, that PBS documentary on Newark deals with this, but I want to specify that work. And that is, I would like, and this is citing Pew, and I'm sure you're familiar with this survey, but civilians say that accountability for misconduct and excessive use of force, that they want that. And they also say that civilians need the legal power to have that sort of accountability. So that stood out to me when you mentioned accountability mechanisms earlier. So I'd love to hear more about those advisory boards. Next is, I would like, and this is really in that phase 1 part of your work, I would like for both this task force and then ultimately as the expectations from our work, the mapping police violence research that says that we are number 2 when it comes to officers shooting residents. I would like we've already dug into those numbers here, and we've had journalists dig into those numbers and confirm them. The pushback we often hear is, yeah, well, we have not had any confirmation about the other 49 states and whether or not those numbers hold. Let's find out. Let's find out. Let's find out. And I think that that should be an expectation in this work, and it should be something we should feel confident as we contextualize this work when it's done, to be able to say to our people that we not just took an honest understanding of our history as it relates to the communities who are at risk, but we also took an honest look at the research and data, that it was all data driven. That's my next ask. Next, and I think this is important, and it's not something I've heard ever in our task force so far, but because of last Wednesday's events with the Capitol, there's now research, and I'm sure you all are, there's people on this call and probably 21CP is aware of this research, that talks about that when it comes to protest, law enforcement is more likely to use force on left-wing groups than it is on right-wing groups. And moreover, that it has nothing to do about whether left-wing groups are more violent, because we now know that whether the number is 93% or 94%, we know that left-wing group protests are peaceful. So I would like to know what can be done going forward to ensure that any right-wing, left-wing, that these are peaceful protests and that they are not met with force. And that is I think that has been something that's been missing in a lot of our conversations here. But I promise you, it's been kind of the bubbling under in a lot of people's minds because of the protests we had last year. And those are my main ask, except to conclude with a final ask, which is the resolution that has those 6 initiatives. I'm very interested in those best practices around our country and around our globe, and hopefully being able to put forth a kind of gold standard when it's all said and done. But again, I think it's all got to be wrapped up in that honest historical examination of the different communities in the city and their interactions historically over the last 100+ years with law enforcement. And that's where someone like Sarah Adams Cornell has, in one of our most recent meetings, has said that the communities, this is our chance to have their voice, which is why I'm really appreciative of you asking for us to say those things. So I know that was a lot, but I have a lot of expectations from both this group and from the work we're going to do. And I know it's difficult, but I'm looking forward to getting to work. Oh, well, there was one final thing. I'm so sorry.
Well, I do want to say this. You are going to be one of our first one-on-ones, absolutely, because you've done the research. I know, if I remember my reading correctly, in large part, we're here because of some of your efforts. So I do want to make sure that we get to other people, because there are some very important things on the agenda that I think folks want to talk about how these meetings are run, and I don't want to run out of time on that. So, but we will be coming to you very soon to get more context.
Thank you. And that was the final thing I was going to say, is that the folk want to speak.
Yes. So I think I next have, I lost my track, so I'm sorry if I call people twice. JD, I have already called on JD Baker?
No, you did not, but I'm city staff.
Okay, perfect. What about a Joanne Davis?
Good afternoon. I'm the executive director for the Oklahoma City Black Chamber of Commerce, and my interest, of course, will be based on what runs our economy, and that's small businesses. And so, of course, any positive policing also positive or negative impacts the profitability of our Black minority-owned businesses in this community. And so while I know you have objectives, and that's a good thing, I want you to meet your objectives because that's what you're contractually bound to do. The main focus I want to present is for you all not to forget that our minority-owned businesses can be a conduit for the trust you're going to need to have in order to get the information from the people in our community. So I encourage you to make sure you have an effort on reaching out to our small businesses, our Black and minority small businesses in our community, to hear from them and what they have to say.
Well, we would take a note and add you early on our list to come and talk to you about the best way to do that. Thank you for that. I think I'm gonna go with John Middendorf.
Yes, thank you. I am the pastor at First Nazarene in Oklahoma City, and along with a couple other faces on this group, part of the Justice Circle. I am interested, having read a lot of your material and what you've done in other places, interested to see how you can help us construct mechanisms whereby we can listen to folks and communities who aren't often heard from and who rarely, if ever, have a say in how they are policed. And so if you can help us with that, that'd be great.
Definitely, and we'll be working together on how to figure that out, because I think this process is lost without making sure that that happens. So I appreciate you surfacing that. And I apologize, this list moves, I think, when people speak. So if I skip somebody, we'll just come back to that to the end. I think next up I have Joshua Harris Teal.
Yes. Joshua Harris Till. I'm the national president of Young Democrats, as well as government relations and affairs director for Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City. I believe what I want is, I guess, first to see Oklahoma City not be second in the nation for officer-caused fatalities. Two, I want the use of force review board to have an independent monitored hire by the city, not the police department. I want the Citizens Advisory Board to have the ability to review cases assigned by the independent monitor, as well as the complaints requested by the city. I would like to log those requests for reviews that go to the Citizens Advisory Board, so that if there's an officer who is constantly being reported, there can be an investigation into why that is the case. And I finally don't want the FOP to be able to prevent the chief of police from firing an officer. I think your role is, I would like for you, one, to explain that no matter how good a de-escalation policy is for a city, that if the escalation of force leads to the death of citizens, then the de-escalation policy, or escalation policy rather, is not effective. I want you to accept suggestions from the committee that can be vetted, edited, and debated before we hold a vote on whether or not we as committee want to accept them. And then I want us to be able to present those suggestions to not only the city council, but the city as a whole, with a timeline and direction for implementation and when they should be fully installed.
Perfect, thank you for that. Josh, do you happen to, I would have presumed that you do, and I have read up on some of the things that you guys have online, but those things that you mentioned, do you have any documents that you're willing to submit to us, that we have those itemized lists right in front of us as we move forward?
Yes, I can send it over to you.
Thank you, sir. The next person, I think, have I called on John George? John George.
Yeah, I'm here now. I had to unmute. I'm
Okay.
John George. I'm the president of Oklahoma City Fraternal Order of Police. And I'm done.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John. All right. I'm going to go with Kendra Wilson Clements.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kendra Wilson Clements, and I am a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. For this task force and the consulting project, I'd like to see action, inclusion, and a delivery on commitments. I'd like to, see community task force driven engagement regarding consulting expectations. I'd like to see your firm leading this project with, objectivity and with transparency as well. I don't believe that we have had much of that up to this point. I'd like to echo Joanne Davis's comments as well. And I guess I should have introduced myself as a CEO of We the People consulting firm. We work with also small minority-owned businesses, tribes, tribal communities, and tribal colleges. And so we've got a big presence with our indigenous population here in Oklahoma. And we too have vested interest in and have a big ask for your firm to also open that up, open those conversations up to our business owners as well, our indigenous owned business owners as well, because I do believe that there's severe underrepresentation on that front as well. So voices need to be heard. I would also, gosh, what else would I like? I'd also like to see a committed effort to focus on how we can strategically shift and move and allocate and maybe reallocate dollars and cents in our current budget to incorporate resources that are desperately needed. And when I say resources that are desperately needed, I mean mental health resources. I mean crisis response teams. I mean training. I mean other things other than a police officer showing up at a heated situation and it not going well for us, because that's why we're here. So I'd like to see a movement, or at least a strategic plan in how we can shift and move and allocate and reallocate dollars and cents. As a consultant, as a business owner, and as an owner of multi-million-dollar budgets, what I know is it can be done. And so I'd like to see a tried and true effort to move those dollars around. I think, there's been, the word on the street is defund the police. That's not what we want. But we certainly do want a committed effort to reallocate dollars and cents to resources that will help save the lives of our Black and Brown community members. Because as it's going now, we don't have any of that. And as a result, we're clearly losing our lives. I would also like to ask the consulting firm as well. I would really like to understand what it is and have visibility on how it is that you plan to create an accountability plan for the City of Oklahoma City, the police task force. More importantly, what does that execution plan look like? I know that in my own consulting practices, after a strategic planning session, the who, what, when, where, why, and how is mapped out. And then it's accountability and execution following that. And so I'd like to see who's been tasked with what those outcomes are, those expected and agreed upon outcomes are, and what the timelines are in completing those items.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Next, I have Carrie. Carrie. Okay, Joshua, I think I skipped you. Higginbotham.
Yeah, my name is Josh Higginbotham. I'm an educator and an organizer with Black Lives Matter OKC. Who's in charge of our research and development. And to piggyback off some things that Mr. Harris Till and others have mentioned, I want to focus with you guys on how to reduce the use of force incidents, the overall number, and sort of as a short-term goal, because quite frankly, the long-term goal is that if we are going to have police, which is another debate, we would like there to be no more incidents where police kill or brutalize people, plain and simple. And so to try to get that to end is really sort of a baseline request. And so whatever sorts of methods, whatever sorts of experiences you guys have had in trying to make that, working toward that goal, that's definitely what I'm interested in.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Lee Rowland.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Rowland. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion and Diversity at Epic Charter Schools. I'm also a pastor and a speaker and consultant, particularly with schools, that schools help schools avert these kinds of problems that we're seeing in our city with certain groups systematically failing and being underserved. So that's my passion, but I think what I'd like to see here is for you all to help us, help share all those best practices. I'd love to see them. I'd love to see us embrace them as a city. Moreover, I'd like to see you all help us create an agreed upon blueprint that holds those in leadership accountable. Let me restate that, an agreed upon blueprint, so we don't have any issues there. When the system fails, then we can say, I'm a leader of this and we agreed upon that, and therefore thus and so should happen. And I think we're where we are here as a nation because right now it's because there has not been an agreed upon blueprint of that holds people in power and authority in leadership.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next I have Millicent Newton Embry. Millicent. Okay, I'm going to move on to Nate Tarver. Nate Tarver.
Yes, I am. Currently serve as the Associate Vice President and Chief of Police for the University of Oklahoma. I'm formerly a police officer with the City of Oklahoma City after 26 years. And what I would like to see is the help from you all, if at all possible, on the national trends and local trends of how to better build the bond between the police departments and the community and the trust. So that's basically it.
Thank you for that, sir. I'm going to go to Mark Nelson. Did we have Mark Nelson speak? Mark Nelson.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
Yes, ma'am. I'm the Vice President of the Fraternal Order Police. And yeah, we're interested in hearing what practices are best accepted and work best all across the country, and see what we can bring here to Oklahoma City to kind of echo what some others have said, just work on the relationships with all members of our community.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I have a Nikki Nice.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Nikki Nice. I am the councilwoman for Ward 7 in Oklahoma City. And I have a few asks. I won't be as long as Councilperson Cooper, who I adore, but I just want, first and foremost, we want accountability, we want transparency, we want reconciliation, and we want assurance from not only our police chief, but the Fraternal Order of Police, that we are all working towards the common goal of truly working with the community and engaging with the community, and making sure as well that we have the review of the participants in the process when it comes to our Citizens Advisory Board compared to other cities. Recently, we had some folks come to our council meeting and express concern about the members who are on and how long they've been on our Community Advisory Board, which are very valid concerns. We need a deep clean as far as understanding and knowledge of our Oklahoma City Police Department, just like a deep clean of research and resources and understanding. We want the good, the bad, and the ugly. Obviously, we have all heard a lot of the things that are not so good when it comes to our numbers, when it comes to our statistics. We want to know why. We want accountability for those things. We also want, and this is my ask, how our communities can be the violence interrupters in this work in our neighborhoods that are highly affected. And I know this is not technically what you all are asked to do, but we have an old jail in our city, and maybe there's a way that you all, through the work that you do, can help us look at how to repurpose that old jail for our community and for our city, as well as we have a situation in our community, as in my ward, which is predominantly African American and folks of color. where there's a possibility of a training, a police and fire training center to be placed in the Northeast quadrant. So what the positives and also the negatives of these types of facilities being placed in communities that are already say they are over harassed and over policed. And in comparison to that, we have a area in this same place, probably less than 3 miles away, where we are housing the Department of Public Safety, so Oklahoma Highway Patrol. And less than a block away, we are also housing the Sheriff's Department, Oklahoma County Sheriff's Department. And less than a mile from there, we have our Spring Lake Division Department. So all of these things are housed in our core part of our Black community. So we have some issues to work through pertaining to what that looks like. And I also want you all to help us look at the lack of diversity in our police department, especially pertaining to more of those higher positions. And I would ask first and foremost that you would speak with Chief Tarver and Chief Nelson pertaining to them being a part of our police department and unfortunately having to leave and receiving better positions for them to be doing the work and continue to do the work that they love in comparison to what we have seen in our communities. So those are the things that I would like to see. Also pertaining to our school resource officers, what that looks like as far as our children, because we have some terrified Black and brown kids when it comes to them being stopped by the police. And we want to, again, increase the relationship when it comes to how we police and how we can create a better transparency. Again, I can't say transparency enough, and accountability, but that also means with the chief communicating and being transparent with the elected officials that have asked questions as well. So we have a big gap when it comes to accountability in that part of our conversations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I am going to, unless I hear some strong objections, put about a 8-minute time limit on us at this time, because what I don't want to happen is for us not to have time to discuss what I think is very important with you all, which is how these meetings are run. I don't want that conversation not to happen. And so if that's okay, I think I have about 4 more people, and we obviously will have more and more time to talk with each other, but if that's okay, I'm gonna put an 8-minute on us. So we'll stop at 50 past the hour. Next, I'm going to go to Rodney Cox, I believe.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. As you said, my name is Rodney Cox. I am a principal here in Oklahoma City Public Schools. I am also the executive director for Black Lives Matter Youth League Oklahoma. And for me, I think it's just an importance, if I'm piggybacking off what Miss Nikki said, is for the youth that's here in Oklahoma. And I think that's my purpose of being here is I want my students to have a voice. With everything that we're doing now and the laws that we're trying to change, it affects them the most. And so I just want to be able to create a space to where their voices are heard when we're starting to make these decisions. How can we incorporate them into where they're getting out their opinions? Because like I said, it's their future that we're getting ready to make decisions for, and that's who it's going to affect. And so that's all I have to say.
Principal Cox, I appreciate what you're saying, and I can tell you, and most of the time in the work that when I do this, it's the young people that have the best ideas and insights anyway. So we definitely will be coming to you to further those conversations. Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
Next, I think I have Ms. Sherry Dickerson.
Can you hear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I am Reverend T. Pastor at East 6th Street Christian Church, and I am also the executive director for Black Lives Matter Oklahoma City, and state coordinator for the Oklahoma movement for Black lives. In the to honor brevity, many of my hopes and expectations have already been expressed by many of the other task members, especially part of the BLM OKC team. So I want to emphasize wanting to see consideration around possible removal or change of status for resource officers within our local schools. Again, as you said, I'm glad to hear that you are going to include and amplify the voices of our young people. That is paramount and priority for me. I want the trauma acknowledged that community members, especially Black and Brown and LGBT community members have received, and hopefully you are able to interpret what that actually means to those on the other side who sometimes seem oppositional when we say that there is an overwhelming amount of trauma as well as terror that is felt. I mean, we want that reduced. And then do want the seeming dominance of the influence that the Fraternal Order of Police has within our law enforcement agencies to be adjusted and addressed. And then I don't want to see any more officer involved fatalities in interactions. So it is known, and I have asked that we really look at implementing policy around no use of lethal force. And I'll end there.
Thank you for that. And we'll
Tanisha, I've got a clarifying question for Ms. Dickerson. You said change of status for SROs or for school resource officers. What do you mean by that?
So many of the young people, the students that I interact with, and I have been an educator within various systems here, feel that their presence isn't needed on a daily basis. They also, some of the interactions that they have, the students feel like there's either favoritism or that there are certain demographics of students that are targeted. And so it decreases the amount of trust overall for the students. So their status is how often they're going to be within the schools if it's necessary, and how they're going to function in that position.
Understood.
I also,
Understood.
something a student did say is they would like their resource officers to be unarmed inside the schools.
Okay. Well, I can assure you we'll take a look at youth interactions to include SRO programs and any other contact between OKC police and youth.
Thank you.
I have Todd Stone.
Yeah, hi, thank you. My name is Todd Stone, and I represent the citizens of Ward 4 in Oklahoma City, which is basically southeast Oklahoma City, or a large portion of it. And really what I'm looking for from this group is just a good, solid set of recommendations that will allow the police department to better interact with all of the communities that it serves. So, and I just really appreciate everyone volunteering for this task force. It's not a small undertaking, but I really do appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then the last, one of the last people is Rachel Hollis. Rachel Hollis, are you on?
Yes, this is the interpreter speaking.
Oh.
Hi, my interpreter is voicing for me. So I teach an interpreting training program at Oklahoma State University in Oklahoma City. I'm also a deaf interpreter as well, and I'm involved in this task force to represent the deaf community, and I'm hoping to see improvement on police interactions with deaf people. I want to see more cultural awareness, not only for deaf people, but for other groups as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. We'll definitely be circling around to talk about that. That's very important in this work. The last two I have, I think is Tim and Chief Gorley. So we have a minute left. So
I'll defer to the chief.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
I'm just taking this opportunity to listen. Wade Gorley, Chief of Police, and I think I've made some presentations and things to the group, so I won't tie up any more of your valuable time. So thank you for being here. Look forward to very much to the evaluations and your insight into our department and the way we do business. So thank you.
Thank you, and so I really appreciate all of you guys sharing. That will take a lot. I'm sorry, did I miss somebody? Who did I miss?
Sarah's waving her hand, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's right. I'm sorry, Sarah. I remember you speaking, but that was to ask a question. I apologize. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Sarah Adams Cornell. I'm an Indigenous organizer in Oklahoma City through Matriarch Sovereign Community School, the Anti Project, Central Oklahoma Two-Spirit Society, and I'm also the president of the ACLU of Oklahoma. Wanted to just say that my hope is to increase the number of citizens who walk away safe, unharmed, and alive from interactions with police. My number one ask is no lethal force and a defunding of the police so that we can have behavioral health workers responding to behavioral health calls, education to understand community needs, and the FOP to not be a barrier to change. I would absolutely love for my community members to not be fearful when interacting with the police. And I expect from your agency engagement with community and working for community with processes that have proven results with transition and budget plans attached for short and long-term implementation, even when the people who are in power now or are not in office anymore, when there's turnover in the city, something that will lead over into those who are in leadership next. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I got a note, I might have missed maybe Miss Kelly. Did I miss Paula Kelly?
You did, ma'am, for good reason. I'm city staff.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you all. And I really do, I thank you all for sharing. I know that to some of this information for you all was not new because you all work together and you talk together all the time, but this made it very clear, okay, to us, what our directive is, and that you expect the best practices, you expect transparency, you expect for us to listen and engage across all communities, and that you want implementation that's realistic, and a host of other things. So this was very helpful to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to what it is that you all expect. One thing that I want to bring up before I turn it over to MT is two things that came up for me. One is this no lethal force. That sounds important to many of you all. And I think we need to take a chunk of time in our next meeting to actually talk about what does that mean and what does that look like. And also, a lot of things came up today that, and I know I'm new to this process, that seem to be for the other working group, whereas what we understand here for this group is de-escalation policy and independent law enforcement accountability to the community. And a lot of things that you all talked about can fall under those two buckets, but I just wanna make sure that you are being heard and being served. And so in our next meeting, if we don't have time in this meeting, I think we need to start off with those expectations. And even if we stick to those two buckets, if there's things that come forward from this group, how do we make sure that they get to the working group? So none of these thoughts and opinions are left out. So if there's no questions or any thoughts with me on that, then I think what we need to go back to our group is talk about the next meeting. Actually, we need to talk about the next meeting, whether you all want us talking, whether I know you have been talking about having community present. So hopefully we get to those two things next. And then we'll round out maybe the last 10 minutes or so with what's our plan and agenda for the next meeting so we can all be on the same page. Any questions or comments? All
Ganesha?
right, yeah, thank you, you guys. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, Ganesha. Before you end, I would like to give Tim Tardibono an opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Tim?
Hey,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
no, Chief, I appreciate that, but I know we've got running out of time and other things to talk about. I'm sure I won't be quiet in future meetings. So, but I guess substantively, everything that was covered, I wouldn't add to that anything substantively wise, and I can express my procedural concerns to you guys at another time.
Okay, Tim, thank you. Okay, thank you, Ganesha, and thank you, 21CP, for your involvement to this point. We certainly appreciate you being here. Now on to the next item on our agenda, a discussion of task force member requests. As many of you will recall, as we were ending our last meeting, Sarah Adams Cornell spoke about her feelings on how the task force had been operating at that point, and requested that other people be allowed to place things on the agenda to discuss in this meeting. At that time, I said we agreed with that, and to that end, we agreed to allow, she did contact me again on last Friday and request to be placed on this agenda, and I told her that that would be taken care of. And the information that you received in your packet called Honored OKC Law Enforcement Policy Task Force Committee members came from Sarah and a group that had met with her. And so at this time, I'm going to yield the floor to Sarah Adams Cornell and her group to speak on the letter that she sent on January the 1st. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, MT. I appreciate the time of the task force. Wanted to just express that myself and other community members on the task force feel like there has been it has largely been run and goal-oriented by the city up until this point, with very little buy-in from the community members, which and in many ways the task force has been used through social media and things like that to say that we've been doing a lot of work together when we don't feel like we're doing a lot of work together. We're mainly being talked at. So we want to suggest that some changes be made to our task force to make it a more equitable place and to honor the time that the community members are giving to this task force, so that we feel like we're not just sitting here and not being able to contribute as much as we would like to. Because ultimately these are, we're representing our communities, not us, but our communities, and our community voices deserve to be heard in these spaces. And so we have, I hope everybody was able to receive the letter and had a chance to take a look at it, but we'll be going through the items to kind of explain why some of them are a little vague, deserve a little more explanation about why we're asking for these changes. But the first one is a rotation between city-led and community-led meetings that include agenda creation and moderator duties. This is something that we feel like is due for equity, so that we are also have the ability to set the tone and really let you know the pieces that are important to us. This is we feel like, or at least myself, in the very beginning, it felt very confused about how we were going to run these meetings and who was in charge and who was going to be setting the tone and the agenda. And for equity's sake, we feel like that needs to rotate. Now, the meeting dates and things like that would maintain, but the who will be running the meetings would change, so that our communities have time to talk about buy-in and what the community needs are. Which would include moderator duties, and each of our communities would have an opportunity to moderate those meetings as well if they chose to do that. Second, number 2 on that list is implementation of 30-minute community presentations at each meeting, so each community can communicate their needs and priorities that can be recorded and added to the goals of the committee. Especially some of our communities have really great non-punitive methods for community peacekeeping, which I think would benefit the entire task force to hear about that and how successful they've been in many of our communities. And so, and some of what other people have brought up, like Joshua, about international models, and that James has also talked about as well. I think these educational pieces are really paramount because we can't fully, I know what's going on in the Indigenous community. I don't know what's happening in all the other communities, but as a person on this task force, I think it is part of my duty to understand and have a better understanding so that if we're going to make recommendations, I need to understand what's happening with other community members as well, so that I'm not just looking out for my community. I want to be a good representative, but I can't do that unless I learn about these other communities and what their priorities are and what they're experiencing. And so there would be a 30-minute presentation in each one, because I also think it's incredibly important for our law enforcement and our FOP to understand what's happening in these communities as well. A lot of time these complaints go straight to the police department and the FOP doesn't hear about them. And many of these things are really very important for the FOP to hear. They need to be hearing our complaints as well, especially if they're the gatekeeper for change for the police force. Like, that is tough for me. So I hand it over to Kendra Wilson Clements to talk about item number 3.
Thank you, Sarah, for kind of kicking us off and for putting together this this letter and these additional requests. What I would like to request of the group for consideration is to evaluate the meeting times that we have scheduled for this task force. The meeting times have traditionally been set at 1:30 in the afternoon, which causes a tremendous barrier for many of our community members who are working class people. And so many of which do not have access to technology in the middle of the afternoon, have jobs where they're unable to break away for 2-3 hours to step in on these very important calls. And so we would ask for consideration to move these meeting times to 5:30 p.m. To inevitably remove the burden for our working community members. This would essentially, allow for greater community involvement, input, and feedback, which we believe is desperately needed. We need to allow the inclusion of voices that are currently not being heard due to this 1:30 in the afternoon meeting.
Thank you, Kendra, and pass it over to Grace for item number 4.
So one of the things about the task force is that we are looking for inclusion for marginalized communities and of communities across the board in Oklahoma. It is important that when we go to speak to communities, that it is community-led. So not just in the African-American community and indigenous communities, LGBTQ, but we also need to engage people in every citizen who falls under the American with Disability Acts and include them on this task force, which includes groups that discuss non-visible and visible disabilities. Language is, of course, important. I am going to use the term disabilities right now, just because so we can all be on one accord. When we engage in communities, if you are going to speak with someone who is in the indigenous community, if I have a great idea, I don't go to indigenous communities. What I would do is contact Sarah or Kendra to say, hey, I have an idea. This is what I think would be working well for the community. What do you think? What should I do next? In our community that is those who fall under the American with Disabilities Acts, behavioral health community and autistic community, they're not represented. And we need to have them here. Non-visible disabilities, including autism, can cause interaction with the police to escalate very quickly simply because of the way someone who is on the spectrum responds to commands, responds to being touched, responds And in those responses, it can seem or feel like to an officer that that person is being resistant or callous or not paying attention or not complying. Those communities need to be on this task force so we can have some information from them from what is needed and what needs to be changed. So we are asking that they are added to the task force, and not just one group. So the autistic community, behavioral health community, and possibly an additional ad for non-visible disabilities. So we want to make sure that those groups are included because that is very important and affects many Oklahoma citizens.
Thank you, Grace. I'll also add youth to that as well. We need some youth in our on our task force as well. And up next, Cherie with item number 5.
All right, number 5, which, as you heard, many of us expressed our concerns and desires around the redefinition.
Cherie,
What?
Cherie, this is MT, and we're having difficulty hearing you.
Okay, 1 second. Hold on. Is this better?
Anybody? I'm getting some head shakes. No.
No. Let me try this. How about now?
Great.
Okay. So what I was saying, I want to piggyback off of what Grace said to just say that there is an adage that I think attributes very well to what she was speaking on, and many of us, is what is done for us or in respects to us, without us, you do to us. And so we are trying to remove that as a practice and an element that we see. You've heard many of us already express our concerns and desires for the eradication of officer-involved fatalities dealing with police interaction. And so the consideration of implementation of change of procedure and process we want considered is the removal of lethal force. And I know I'm not going to belabor that since it was already stated that that is something that we're going to talk about in greater form and expound on in another meeting. But it is very important. The loss of life in any instance is one of the greatest breakers of trust and barriers in bridge building in community policing. And we also want to talk about defunding the police. Yes, as far as moving the monies into community organizations aspects and leaders to where what is needed, the community is actually able to do most of the policing, if we use that term, themselves. And being expeditious in that so that we can focus on seeing some of that implemented for 2021.
Thank you, Cherie. We'll move on to item number 6 with Josh.
Thank you. So item number 6, asking for the removal of FOP representatives from the task force. Now, specifically, we mean as voting representatives on policies or other initiatives and things like that, because as some people have remarked, we think that everyone should hear feedback from the community. But since law enforcement already has representation on the task force with various chiefs and others, then law enforcement is represented. Want to be very specific, though, about why we're asking for this. There were several people when the task force was first being put together who explicitly decided to not be on the task force out of fear because there was FOP representation on the task force. There have been a number of members on the task force now who've contacted me personally, and people who would like to be on the task force now who've contacted me personally, saying that they would, except for the fact that the FOP has representation. And this should be a cause for concern. I do think that it's incredibly important, and we all do, for the FOP to listen, right? But especially given the fact, and I appreciate Mr. Nelson and Mr. George, who have both said that they're here to listen. Well, that's good. And we can do the listening, with the public and everybody else. That's really, really important. But there are some things that make it very, very, create a climate of fear. There are representatives of the community, city council members, that they have very publicly gone after, who count as representatives, right, of the people. I would also say too, and this is maybe a smaller thing, but and it shows a disconnect where I think there needs to be greater listening. This last year, I saw, I believe, 27 or 28 fallen officers who had been memorialized. 21 of those 27 would have been officers enforcing Jim Crow laws, which should be kind of striking, right? That shows that there is a disconnect between that history. They decide to still honor someone who would have been enforcing segregation laws and policies of that sort. And I don't think that that's what we want to do as a community. So that's why we're asking for that removal. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. We know that, this isn't all members. These are things that we feel that very strongly about. I did have a really good conversation with MT, who also I understand was in conversation with the mayor as well. And so I understand that from their point of view that they're okay with the rotation of the meetings, implementation of the 30-minute community presentations. We do also know that moving a meeting time really should be a group consensus, because there are a lot of people here, but we would like that to be considered, and we would like to hear back from everybody else. There are instances where some of the members don't have paid time off, that they have to choose between making some money for their family for groceries or sitting on this task force. And those, I think, even if we do something where every other meeting is at 5:30 in the evening, that is something that would be helpful as well. Adding members, I understand that the mayor is the one who asked or made recommendations, but they also want recommendations from the community about who we would like to add. But I would like to turn it over to our task force to just respond to what we've put before you, and see if there is consensus to these recommendations.
Sarah, before you do that, let me interject a few things into this. I did not personally talk with the mayor about this, but I talked to someone who had talked to the mayor. And you are correct that the rotation between city-led and community-led meetings is fine with us. The only thing that we have to be mindful of there is that when it comes to creating an agenda, we have some very strict guidelines on what and how, when agendas have to be approved so that they can be mailed out under the Open Meetings Act. So as long as we can comply with that, and we can work on that, but I just wanted to put that out there that we do agree to a rotation of meetings. As long as we can get that done and also get the work that 21CP is doing. So in the meetings, we can get those accounted for too. As a matter of fact, I think once we got the consultant on board, you were going to be hearing a lot less from the city itself and hearing more from the consultant. But again, we don't want to stymie your request to be allowed to present some things. And so we will agree to that. Implementation of 30-minute community presentations, we also have no issues with that. Again, as long as we can get those things in the agenda and get them done and still give 21CP a chance to do the work that they have to do and to communicate with the group the way that they need to in a group setting. Number 3, you were correct, and I would like to hear what everybody else has to say about that, because if we move the meeting time, if we move the meeting date, then we're going to impact someone with a 44-member committee. We're going to impact someone, and so that's something that the committee needs to look at as a whole and provide some feedback on. Adding members who represent the behavioral health community, the autistic community, and the Americans with Disability Act. We are in favor of that. Again, the mayor, each member of this committee was assigned or named or selected by the mayor. And so this was discussed with him, and he indicated that he agrees to adding people from the autistic community. He agrees to add people, a representative from the behavioral health community, and he himself has added a person to the committee from the American with Disabilities Act community. And that person's name is Sidna Madden, M-A-D-D-E-N, S-I-D-N-A.
Yeah, MT Sidna is the, just to clarify, she is the chairman of the Mayor's Committee on Disability Concerns. And he felt that with their request related to ADA, that would be appropriate to have Sidna added to the task force.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. In reference to the number 5 redefinition of the task force scope to include no lethal force, the scope of this task force was to do 2 things: review de-escalation and the Citizens Review Board. No lethal force. Force is an issue of de-escalation. So there's no need to really change the scope of the task force. If we want to talk about lethal force, no lethal force, whatever, it falls under the current scope of this task force. Okay, so I think that should address that particular issue. Removal of the FOP from the task force. And I heard today a clarification of as voting members. Again, these people were added to the task force by the mayor. They were added to the task force, if I'm not mistaken, clarify this for me, Craig, as voting members. And so
yes, that's correct.
We have discussed them being on the task force. We can go back now and give him that clarification as it relates to voting members, but he was not in favor of removing them from the task force. And we can get clarification on as voting members or as non-voting members. I think, though, personally, I think that out of 44 people on this task force, having the FOP, 2 members from the FOP vote should not be a problem. I don't know that I quite understand why them as voting members would hinder the work of this task force. But I will run this issue by the mayor and see what his thought is.
Thank you, MT. It looks like JD Baker has his hand up.
JD, go ahead. JD, are you muted? We can't hear you.
I want to clarify something. I'm JD, and Garland Pruitt was not able to get a call, so I just forwarded my link and then realized the link still has my name. So the other JD on here is actually Garland. Garland, can you hear us? Garland?
Sharita, do you see Garland?
Sharita's not on the call anymore, but I can see Garland. I changed his name. He oftentimes will have audio issues, and I think he's having an audio issue right now. He's gotten on a couple of times. It's his second time logging on, so we'll try again.
Okay.
Looks like Dexter Nelson was wanting to speak.
Yeah, I had a quick question in regards to number 6 and what I believe Mr. Higginbotham said. Can we get some clarification as to, in the removal of the FOP from the task force, he talked about there was some fear from potential members because they were involved in the process. Could we get some more information on that?
information as far as, I mean, there were members of the community and various organizations who wanted, whenever there was the first ask for people to be on the task force, who, when they found that FOP would have representation, they did not want to be a part of it.
So they were afraid of them more as FOP members and not as police officers?
Well, yes, as the police union, specifically.
Okay.
And I'll lean into that as well, just to say that I, as an advocate in the community, like I have felt that some of my fellow activists and advocates have been threatened by the FOP, both, and have felt unsafe around them or have been targeted by them. And that to me is just, and understanding too that they are the only gatekeeper, we could come up with like all of the most amazing ideas and they could put a stop to it, and to me that feels very unfair, that even if these are community recommendations, that all of this work could be for nothing if they don't agree. And that to me feels entirely inequitable. And so for me, I feel like it's duplication of representation as well, with the police being on and the FOP. And so it's a difficult situation. It's difficult. But I do feel like they need to hear from us in a way of, being in the meetings, to know that there are issues and that they need to hear about them as well.
I agree with that 100%. That's why they're here. They need to hear the issues of the community, just like the chief needs to hear the issues of the community, just like the city manager hears the issues of the community. I think there's a better chance of them hearing and understanding if they are a part of this group, to be able to hear firsthand what you, the community members, think about these things. If we get recommendations, why those recommendations are being made. Again, the recommendations will go to the mayor and city council. And I think with the FOP's help, if we can get that help through this education of being a part of this community, then we have a better chance of getting these things made and done, getting them finalized, than we do if we exclude them, because then they don't really have that involvement with the community. They don't have that involvement with the committee that's making the recommendations.
It also looks like Garland still has his hand up, but maybe his audio isn't working.
Garland, are you there?
It looks like Garland doesn't have, his mic isn't, the mic isn't on there. It doesn't look like he has audio that he can speak into right now.
Okay. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on it, and some information that I got from the mayor as it relates to the requests that have been made. I'll open it up now or Sarah, you can open it up now to the group.
Is there any feedback on the items that have been presented, especially about meeting time and lean in about FOP and adding members? Looks like Tim has his hand up.
Do you all have a proposal on what evening we would move to? Because I have I'm a teacher in the evenings, and so that would cause conflicts for me.
We had intended to keep the same meeting dates, just the time would move.
And isn't part of what 21CP, as far as outreach to underserved or unheard voices, aren't I presume a majority of those meetings, community meetings, going to be in the evening?
Yes, but we have a lot of community members here who are still impacted by that time.
And we can work around whatever time you guys choose. That's not a problem.
I noticed that Gloria Torres has her hand up.
Hello. My only comment is shifting this to 5:30 would be difficult for my schedule. I'm obviously going to work to accommodate whatever the committee comes up with, but the current time is helpful for me to be able to stay engaged.
Thank you, Gloria.
This is
Anybody-
Joanne Davis. The only question I have is how does that impact the city employees that put this on? I'd just be curious to know, is that going to impact the city employees at 5:30?
We could work around whatever we need to. I mean, obviously for me, it doesn't have an effect, but on our hourly employees, I'll make sure that we're fair with our hourly employees who are involved with coordinating and managing this, and that their time is respected. We would definitely, if that was the wish of the group, that we would work around whatever we need to accommodate that.
Thank you.
Are there other, Gloria, did you want to say something again? It looks like your hand's still up, but maybe it just didn't release after you spoke.
Sorry, I don't know how to bring it back down.
That's okay. James Cooper?
Yeah, thank you. A lot of what I heard from those items I support, especially if we can look at different times for meetings and members of the community lead those conversations, especially because that hits what my first ask was, which was that honest understanding of the history, right? So a lot of those items have my support. I don't know. I'll say this about the FOP, and I'm always open to dialogue with John George and Mark Nelson on this. I don't know. I would like to, when it comes to like social media, like Facebook is just a dumpster fire, and we all know that these days. And Twitter is as well. And there are a lot of people who are just have, they don't have that idea of all of us as community members moving together as in a restorative, healing, and productive way. And I've been worried about some of the social media comments. Like I had somebody last year come over to my campaign page asking why I didn't support law enforcement. And I responded that I had just crafted, that resolution that had 6 different items on there that were the result of listening to residents during those city council meetings, of attending trauma-informed trainings, going on ride-alongs, talking with Chief Gorley, the deputy chiefs, municipal council. And once I explained all of that, this individual was like, oh, okay, cool. And I was like, where did this person get that? And they had seen a post where the FOP had said that I had voted against the budget last year and the FOP contract. And I did, because we're in negotiations right now. Like we're in this liminal space where we're all trying to figure out the best ways forward. And yet it led to this interpretation by someone that I was anti-law enforcement. Well, I would just remind everybody that one of the 6 items on there is making sure that our officers have access to 24/7, 7 days a week mental health care. I'm not anti-law enforcement. And I just see this as an opportunity for us to all lower that temperature and have dialogue with one another. But I don't know, that was a really, that was a moment last year that really stood out to me. So that's all I'll say about number 6 in terms of that relationship. I just do see an opportunity for us to do better there. And then everything else, the other items, of course, I think are really well intentioned. So.
Thank you, James. It looks like Ed's up, and then we only have a couple minutes left, so we'll be ending soon.
Thank you, Sarah. In regards to the time, could we maybe think of a hybrid solution to this? You know, I've put all of these meetings into my calendar and worked other things around them, and to go back now over the next several months and try to rearrange things again. I certainly want to be cognizant of those who this time frame during the midday is difficult for, and find ways to accommodate that. But I hate to lose a lot of other folks who've made the adjustment already in these conversations as well. And then my only comment about the presence of the FOP. I know in the committee, the subcommittee that was working in trying to decide on who our consultants would be, we had numerous conversations around anything that we do going forward is certainly going to require the cooperation of our police officers, and the realities of it are is we do have contracts that are related to how the city engages the police officers. I think to extricate them from this conversation is only going to make their buy-in more difficult going down the road. I would rather see their full participation and for them to hear the concerns that the community has, and to hear their input as well, and find ways to move forward together, than for us to come up with all these recommendations and then to try to bring them into that conversation. I think that only increases our difficulty in the work that's before us. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ed. I think there's a way for us to maybe on the committee, whenever the committee is hosting the meetings, maybe those are the times that we move to 5:30, and we can toggle back and forth between 1 and 5:30 to accommodate both those whose schedules are tied to this, and those who are not getting paid during this time to serve in this capacity. Maybe that's a good middle ground. Shuri Dickerson.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So around the time, yes, there's several. I know when I was on the last contract that I was working on, I had to, and is it worth it? Yes, but I had to take vacation or unpaid leave to be able to participate. Now I am committed into advocating and fostering our goals, but it does cause for some, and I'll speak for me, more of a deficit in being able to simply budget and make sure that all of my needs are being met for my family, if I'm actually having to take unpaid time to be able to participate. So I think that was one of the reasons that several people expressed concerns around the time. As far as with the FOP, and if I just be very candid, some of us, but I will speak for myself, have seen some of the social media and some of the communications that were made by the organization we believe to be the FOP in relation to some of our city council members and community members, to where that instilled fear. And so it has caused a concern. And even the community says, well, if the FOP is going to be involved, what is the actual intent for the task force? How effective is it going to be? And who is actually controlling, who is the controlling factor behind it? And so for us to be able to relay information, to be able to have the community members, all factions, continue trust with us, so that we're able to act as a liaison or a conduit for change. We have to express those concerns, even if it feels like it's an uncomfortable conversation. But the discussion does have to be had. And I would hope that they would understand that in some instances, for most of us, it's not necessarily personal. For me, it is. But when you have someone that is seen as adversarial, as well as possibly, for whatever reason, overtly aggressive, or their organization represents a level of vitriolic a representation, it really makes it difficult. And I think that it also might affect how community members will be willing to talk with our consulting firm for fear of retaliation. So I think those are some of the things why we felt strong about bringing it up, because it is obligatory for us to voice the concerns of other task force members, as well as the community as a whole.
Thank you, Shuri. I know we're about to end. We've got one more hand up, Ajay Pittman, and then after, looks like Nikki's got her hand up. So if we could limit those to very short, and I'm sorry, I hate to do that. I don't want to ever stifle anybody's voice on that, but just honoring the time commitment we have today. And then I'll ask afterward that if you have, and I also know that sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable making statements in front of the whole group. And if you have some feedback, like I'm always open for emails or phone calls, and we can continue that discussion. AJ?
Thank you. First of all, let me just say thank you, everyone, for even having this dialogue or having this discussion. This is a prime example of why we're here, so that everyone can have a safe space to share their opinions and feelings as we move forward to try to make change in our community. I just wanted to offer a brief suggestion that these meetings are recorded. So if we are going to try a hybrid time, maybe we offer up the recording of those meetings to the people that weren't able to attend, or to the task force members. We will be starting legislative session on February 1st. And so our time commitment will definitely vary depending on when we are in legislative session and when we are not. But if we can offer the recordings to the members, so that whether the meeting is at 1:30 or at 5:30 p.m., we have access to the content, that would be helpful.
Thank you, AJ. Nikki?
Yes, I'm just curious, as I was listening to the conversation and concerns addressed, has anyone from the Ask Committee of the letter spoken personally to the mayor? Because I understand he appointed us all to this task force, so I'm curious to know why he's not addressing these concerns from himself personally.
I didn't send that email to him, Nikki, and that's my fault. I'm glad to do that.
Please do. Because I think it's important that we hear, that you all actually hear from his mouth, and no disrespect to the people who are relaying the messages, but for him to have crafted this task force that he's proud of, you all need to address and hear why he has said yes or yay or nay to some of your asks.
Thank you, Nikki. I'll be in touch and get back with you on that. Grace Franklin?
So just real quick, I just wanted to say that part of the reason we brought these 5 components or 6 components is because we wanted to show what a community-led meeting would look like, which includes having discussions. So if, like, for the item in moving the meeting, if that's not good for everybody, so be it. But we want to have the discussion. I think when we started the task force, it was something new, and maybe we didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know what it was going to look like. So we needed to come back and have a few conversations that we initially didn't have, because we really didn't know what this would look like. And so as we move along, we want to be able to touch on some things that may be beneficial for the group, and maybe not. Maybe in the end, that's not what we will do. So I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, there's a push and I have to agree. You don't have to do anything. We just want to be able to bring some issues to the table and have some discussions. So I just want to make that really clear that this is not about a pushing or a determining, you know, what we're going to do as a group. This is about bringing some issues to the table and having some discussions that we haven't had yet. And also I want to say, with the concern with the FOP language is always important. And there has been things said that for community leaders and community activists have placed us in a position that we are somehow on the side of people who are hurting our communities. And we're not. We're on the side of justice for anybody who's a citizen and their rights to be in the system that includes also a trial, includes all those things. We want people to get to that part if it's necessary. So with the FOP, I think there's just some concern about the language that has been used, and sometimes all the time in this environment, what happens when you're a community leader and you step out and you advocate for the rights of a person who may have been engaged in behavior that may be considered criminal. But there is fear with that. There is concern with that in this environment. But again, that's a discussion that we wanted to have. And that's it.
Thank you, Grace. Looks like Ganesha, did you want to say something?
I did want to say something because I didn't want you to shut it down and then we circle off. But if there were any other people that wanted to speak, I definitely didn't want to stop that. But I just want to say 2 minutes to prepare us for the next meeting.
Ganesha?
Yes, sir.
Let me clear up something that
Okay.
I think I didn't make clear to begin with, and I'll take an attempt to do it now. I was selected as the moderator. I'm sorry, the facilitator for this process, this task force, and I am not giving up my position there. I think we can still do what we're doing now. I can moderate and let someone else take over and ask the questions, do things like that. But I am the facilitator, and so I just wanted to make sure that we all understand where we are with this. And I appreciate, Sarah, what you're doing. And please continue if you have something that you need to do. But I didn't want everybody to think that at that meeting that the community is going to present that I'm stepping aside. I will not do that, but I will be there as a facilitator, but I will let whoever from the community is making that presentation to moderate that presentation, okay? Okay, Ganesha.
So just for purposes of preparation for the next meeting, would you all have the next meeting be one that was prepared and started off, number one, by we'll have the 30-minute presentation, and I assume amongst you all, you'll determine who is going to do that. But will you all want to take the lead for the next agenda and those sorts of things? And have us do some sort of presentation around best practices and things like that. I just want to make sure that we are preparing appropriately for the next meeting.
I don't know if we can see that I have my hand up or I raised my hand during the questions for the last part.
Oh, I apologize. I'll let you go ahead.
Just really quickly, in terms of the 6 points that they made, one, whether or not they're in the scope of things that we can vote on as a task force would be my first question. And two, of the things that we can vote on, are we going to have a vote? If so, is that something that'll be like emailed around? I'm not exactly sure kind of what our structure is. I wouldn't imagine that we have like the authority to remove people from the task force, but I would imagine that we at least have the authority to move the meeting if there's a significant consensus. So is there a vote happening on this, or was this just a conversation that was happening? What's the follow-up going to be?
T, you may help with that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Josh, will the plan, I think from what I've heard today, I would like for Sharita and Andrea to help us with coordinating like we have in the past, to coordinate with the task force members, get feedback from every task force member on times and dates, because one of the challenges we had too when we started looking at it and said, well, if we just took second Tuesday and moved it to 5:30, there's the Human Rights Task Force, Mayor's Human Rights Task Force is meeting during that time. And we have at least a couple of members that are on this task force that were on that one also. So that would be a problem. So I think we would have to look at different days. So we will try to find out first if, what the consensus is of moving it from an afternoon to an evening meeting, try to get that first and make sure everyone knows where everyone came out, and then come back if we decide to move to 5:30, or even like Sarah suggested, alternating those between the 5:30 and the evening and the afternoon, that we could still work through that with everyone if that, what the preferences are. And I think that's what we'll do, is suggest, do you want to do afternoons? Would you prefer evenings, or alternating? And then once we get an answer on that, we'll come back and decide, look at potential dates that we could set, and try to set that out in the future, like Bishop Ed was talking about, the idea of being able to set your calendars going forward. So we'll work through that and make sure we coordinate with everyone.
Councilman Cooper?
Yes. Anisha, something that I didn't mention in my lengthy Shakespearean monologue earlier is that some of the working group members have expressed a desire in the last several months, in anticipation of you all coming on board as the consultants, that, there's a lot of smart members on that group who come from a background regarding religion, or you've heard Grace's background, what I mentioned with Paula Sophia. There's law enforcement on there, Major Butler, for instance. And each of them have, not all of them, but several of them have expressed a desire for them to really make those meetings working related, where they could be addressing initiative by initiative with their own minds and with their own ability to do research, and coupling that with the work that you're doing, and then you all engaging in a dialogue. So, well, not on that task force, so I just wanted to express my support for that and bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I heard you. And one of the things, so making part of the meetings working groups, but then also one of the things we were thinking about, and we might have to just do a doodle poll because we don't have time for it here, is creating subcommittees for work in between time, because that's a long time in between meetings, and there could be work that could be being done. We could possibly help not only facilitate that, but bring education and awareness to those subcommittees. So since we ran out of time here, and I don't want to wait a whole another meeting for it, we'll figure out maybe a way to do a doodle poll to you all, or figure out how you all, you usually communicate as a task force, and try to get some feedback on that.
Anyone else? That sounds like a good idea, Kanisha. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, if you'll check your agenda, our next meeting, scheduled meeting, is February the 11th at 1:30. I look forward to seeing everybody there. Anything else before we end this meeting?
Yes, sorry, can I just say one thing real quick? I just want to make sure everyone is aware that we have set up an email for all of you, as well as any of your constituents who have information. Like I heard someone say earlier that sometimes people don't like to talk out in these meetings and give all their ideas and suggestions, and they're more comfortable submitting it in writing. So I give you a time to get ready, because I don't have a chat function to put it in there, but Voices of OKC at 21cpsolutions.com is a email site that we have established that you can send information to us as well, to make sure that everything is getting said and everything is getting heard and considered. So I'll say that again. Voices of OKC at 21cpsolutions.com. Thank you.
And maybe we'll put something together that's easily forwardable, if that's a word, for you guys, so that you can send it around to your different constituencies and networks.
When will, I know phase 1 and 2 are those community engagements. Do you have any sort of actual timeline for when? Because folk are very much anticipating a social media post from me at some point saying, this is it. This is your time to go make your voice heard. Is that something we'll discuss in next month's meeting?
Yeah, no. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit today, but we didn't get a chance to. So the first thing that you should know is we are starting to reach out to community. We're coming up with a list. We're going to go over that tomorrow in an internal meeting, and we'll start doing some outreach to folks. We hope that you make some suggestions to us in the interim about people that we need to talk to. And as far as more formalized meetings, we would probably wait till the next task force to actually talk to you guys about that, but we will start reaching out. There's plenty of folks on this task force and then on the working group to start having those conversations. So we're going to start that immediately. Does that answer your question? Oh, sorry.
Yes and no, thank you. So in terms of someone like myself or Councilwoman Nice or Councilman Stone going on social media and doing a post saying, hey, it's your voice, your city, your future sort of thing, like hold off on that part of it?
No, I mean, unless somebody else objects, I would say it's fine to say that if you feel comfortable with them using just the email address.
The one that you save?
Yeah. Okay. And then there will be more formal announcements of larger gatherings and groupings for conversations. But if you want to just throw out that email address, please throw it far and wide. We're fine with that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
I have a question, if you don't mind. To Councilperson Cooper's point, is it possible through maybe before the Monday that we can get some type of language to make sure it's cohesive to share? And I would rather do that with the email so it's consistent and concise.
Yep, we will work on something, maybe a flyer type of thing or something that you can easily forward in an email or post. We can do that. That's not a problem.
That would be great. Any kind of timeline on that?
So I think we asked for that to be done by Monday. Jessica's going to be the one that's working on that. So I'm sure she can do that, in 15 minutes. So I would say, yeah, I think we should be able to get that done by Monday.
Cool. Thank you. And again, thank you for today and your time. Really welcome to OKC, and we're ready to work.
Thank you. And thank you guys. And you guys feel free to email us too, questions, concerns, comments. Like nothing is off limits for you to send us correspondence.
And in addition to that, and as it relates to our discussion on the 6 points that were brought to us, if any of you have concerns, questions, issues that you need that you want to let me know, again, my email number is mt.berry@okc.gov. You can send that to me, and I will address it as best I can. Anyone else? Thank you, each and everybody. We appreciate you being here today. This meeting is adjourned.
MT,
Yes.
is that okc.com?
okc.gov, G-O-V.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was good meeting you and listening to you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I know Garland is still on the call, MT, he can still hear, but I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now. And Sharita's on another call.